Welcome to the launch of Andrea Carter Brown's new book of poetry, September 12th. I am Karen Alanier, part of the WordWorks team that published this impressive collection of poems. We encourage you to buy the book from Andrea or from small press distribution. Henry Crawford is running the technical functioning of Zoom today. Thanks, Henry. To ensure program integrity, those who are on Zoom have entered muted. Andrea has asked that those on Zoom keep your video on so that she can see you and get the benefit of your support. Also, please have your glass ready with your toasting libation. Now let's hear a few words from Tom Drescher, who is Andrea's spouse. He has been privy to the 20 years that these poems have been in the making. Take it away, Tom.
All right. Well, welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us at this, at this commemoration and launch and this celebration of Andrea's book. This book has been 20 years in the making. When I think about it, I remember it was just about this time, 20 years ago, just about this hour, Andrea and I were sitting on a park bench in Larchmont overlooking Long Island Sound. It was the first time she told me the story, which made up the middle section of this book. And I knew right then that she had seen some amazing things and had some terrifying things as well. But, in the aftermath of 9/11, I'd say for at least 3 or 4 months, it was really impossible to do anything but just kind of put one foot in front of the other. But over the next 6 months, I think for Andrea, the events became something which started being something that you couldn't write about to being something that was impossible not to write about. And over the next 20 years, over the next 10 years, she started working on this material. Hang on just a second. Are you having trouble with feedback there?
Yeah.
Can you just mute the sound? Okay, give me a second. I'll go fix it and then we'll resume.
Thanks for your patience. We're having a little feedback problem here. So we'll be with you soon.
There we go. Sorry about that. They're going to have to go around the side. Anyway, so where was I? So over the next 10 years, she kept working on this thing, and it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And it finally reached kind of like Homeric proportions. It was nearly 200 pages of poetry. And it was also built on this rhythmic, metrical construction, which partly because Andrea is a dyed-in-the-wool arithmetician, it helped her put the material in a form that she could see what she had. But in the end, it turned out to be a little more of a crutch than a help. And at 10 years, she started sending it out, and I thought, geez, who's gonna publish this thing? It's enormous. It's an epic. It's gonna take Odysseus another 10 years to get home, which I guess makes me Penelope in this story. But in any event. And so she started slowly cutting it down. And in the meantime, she wrote 2 other books, one of which was published a year and a half ago. And then about 5 years ago, partly because with the help of some other poet friends of hers, and because she started working on other poets' books as an editor, I think she's started to see that there was a way to focus on what was the most important part of this story and to make it into something which would be readable and comprehensible and interesting. And for that, we thank the WordWorks to a certain extent, because without them, she wouldn't have gotten the chance to edit these other books. In any event, and then about 2 years ago, suddenly what had been 190 pages got down to about 80 pages now, right? And it's just, it really still retains the most remarkable aspects of the story, and I kind of come back to that first night when I heard the story for the first time. At the time I said, this is my new favorite story. It's the story of how you came back to me. Because you can imagine how worried I was on 9/11. Couldn't reach her for 5 hours by phone. There's some people on the Zoom, I think, who remember this. And anyway, the only person I really want to thank right now is Andrea for having figured out, for having written this book and having made it back to me. Because I just don't know what life would be like otherwise. I'm super proud of you and super happy to see you here. And with that, I give you my wife. let me adjust the camera for you, sweetie.
About Andrea Carter Brown, I offer 3 adjectives: nurturing, empathetic, and meticulous. She has that ability to use both sides of her brain with practical and creative matters. I think her new book, September 12th, demonstrates that in the telling of her day, the fateful 9/11 day. She is author of 3 previous poetry collections: The Disheveled Bed, Cavan Carey Press, 2006, Domestic Karma, Finishing Line Press, 2018, and Brook and Rainbow, winner of the Sal's Ear Press Chapbook Prize, 2001. The manuscript she is currently working on, American Fracture, won the 2018 Rochelle Ratner Memorial Award from Marsh Hawk Press. Her poems have won awards from 5 Points, River Styx, PSA, and among others, and are cited in the Library of Congress online guide to the poetry of 9/11. They have been featured on NPR and have also appeared in Crab Orchard Review, Plowshares, the Gettysburg Review, Mississippi Review, and many more. Among the many things she has done for other writers, she was founding editor of Barrow Street. For 6 years, she served on the VCCA Fellows Council. She co-edited the poetry anthology for VCCA's 40th anniversary, Entering the Real World, Poets on Mount St. Angelo, with Margaret B. Ingram, who I noticed is in the audience this evening. I got to know Andrea through the VCCA and this anthology. Since 2017, she has been series editor of the WordWorks Washington Prize, definitely requiring those wonderful traits of nurture, empathy, and meticulousness. And I see that a number of the people that she has worked with in the Washington Prize are here among the guests tonight, so we welcome them too. Now I turn over the spotlight to Nancy White, another dear friend and colleague at the WordWorks, who worked hard to make this impressive book, September 12th, that would meet everyone's high standards, especially Andrea's. Nancy, tell us about September 12th.
Ooh, I would love to. And in part because I have spent the past year and more immersing myself and re-immersing myself in this book. There's so much to say that I had to spend my day with the pen crossing out just come on, you got to get it under 40 minutes, Nancy. So it is nicely shortened. I do want to thank Martha Collins and Cynthia Hogue and Alicia Ostreicher for their advanced praise of the book. It meant a lot to both Andrea and myself to have such cherished voices seeing what I was seeing in the book and feeling the resonance of what it was able to create, and assuring potential readers that, oh yes, no, they really do need to get this book. I spent all of yesterday in social media talking about this book, answering questions, posting little tastes of it, and of course, then my social media feed filled with September 11th images and memories. And so really for 12 hours, I was in September 11th again. And it made me reappreciate the book all over again, and maybe deeper than ever, because it connected me to all of those. I had so many beloveds in New York City at that time, about whom I was frantic, as I'm sure both Tom and Andrea were frantic about each other. And the way the book is made, which I'll talk about in a second, and the poems themselves, and then savoring these little pieces that I was sharing in social media, just brought me close again to all those people, to the terror. I mean, it was hard doing that all day, but it was also so it created kinds of closure to be able to go back. And some people were saying, oh, I can't take anymore. And I was thinking, we will be getting closure about this over and over for decades to come. And I think this book has a tremendous gift to offer because it helps us to get there. If literature does anything, it allows us through language to go back again and again to an experience that a writer has created and find more in it, or something new in it, or something new in ourselves every time we go back. And all year long, this book has been doing that for me. How simply and honestly Andrea shared the story of the terrible day is in some ways the heart of the book. But the heart of the book is so much bigger than that, because she begins with these lyrical homage to the Hudson River School, and then she takes us through all the years of healing afterwards. And so the heart is bigger than the heart. I don't know if that makes sense. But that reassurance that we are bigger than that day, we are even better than the best we saw in people on that day, and certainly over history, better than the terrible things we saw that day. One of the things I love is how the gentleness and the faith gradually breathe back into the book as Andrea and so many others recover over the years. And you can see it in the titles. These titles, third of the book, Learning How to Write, This Is For You, After a Sleepless Night I Cook, The Golden State, An Auspicious Day, and her humor coming back a little when she writes High Noon in Hollywood. She works carefully and gracefully, and after you read a poem, one of Andrea's poems, it's really good to sit quietly in that space for a while. She's not a drama queen. She's not, waving flares in the air. Many of the poems work in a careful, quiet way, and we need to give them the time and the space in which to resonate so that they can do their complete work. And every time I do that, I find something new in these poems. So regard the landscapes that she creates for you. Sit with the observations and the details. Share the longings and the sparks of joy along the way that she shares with us in these poems. The book concludes, the truth is, I was very lucky. And I feel not only, yes, you were lucky, but you were also very smart. that day. She took off like a shot. She ran like hell. She did smart things all day long, even though I'm sure she wasn't saying to herself, that was a good decision and that was a good decision. She just did the right things and got herself home, which is to Tom. And we are very lucky that she was that smart person. She's a wonderful artist. She's a wonderful editor. And I look forward to many more excellent books from her over the years, and have been dying all week to get here to this reading. And Andrea, thank you for these hard-won, genuine poems that we're now going to hear some of.
Oh. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Nancy. I'm a little speechless. Your faith in this book has made it happen. You lavished such care on it and such inspired vision on the interior, Nancy. I can't imagine a better experience. I'd like to talk forever about what you just said and what a joy you are as an editor. But I hope you will forgive me because there are many other people I need to thank before I read. Everybody on the Zoom or in person helped me write this book in ways large and small. You sustained me as a person and as a writer throughout the 20 years that this has been in the works. And I wish that I could tell all of you about all of you. There are as many stories about that as there are stories in the book. So I hope you will accept a generic thank you. Those of you who are not mentioned by name, but there are a few people on the Zoom and in person whom I must mention by name. And I'm going to start with those people who are on the Zoom. First of all, my sister, Deborah Drake, whose phone call that morning from North Carolina, having seen the planes go into the towers, probably saved my life. After that, there's Andy Monsheen and Leslie Halloran. Andy was Tom's boss. They were working together on 9/11. And we were reunited in their house in Westchester 12 hours later. Andy took care of Tom when Tom was worried about what had happened to me. And they took care of us for the 3 days that we stayed with them until we went back to New York City, when we stayed with, also on the Zoom, Lee and Sophie Dichter, who took care of us for almost 2 weeks while we sort of figured out what to do next. And lastly, at the end of those 2 weeks, Molly Peacock offered us her empty apartment in Stuyvesant Town. It was a place where I had been many times. It was filled with books and color and comfort, and staying in her lovely home made our next 5 months bearable. Those are just a few of the stories. In person, and I'm going to face the in-person crowd now. I want to mention Carol V. Davis. Raise your hand, Carol. Carol is my dearest poetry partner since moving to Los Angeles. She and I share each other's work regularly, and she saw these poems as they were being written, and they're much better for her input. I want to thank Monica Leal, who designed my spectacular website. Where are you, Monica?
She's right there.
Oh, under the tree, yes. So anyway, it made it happen for me. I don't see Teddy, but I know there are people here who know Teddy. Teddy was one of the people whom I personally did not know, but with whom Tom had worked, who offered us his home to stay in after 9/11. Because he and Joanna, his wife, had just moved to Los Angeles and arrived the day before. But more pressingly, Teddy introduced me to the next person I want to mention by name, Abby Weintraub. You will see Abby's name on the cover. Abby is the cover designer. What can I say? It is just gorgeous. And I'm so moved that she came up with a cover that makes my book what I wanted it to be physically. Thank you. And of course, there's many more people here that I'd like to mention, but I do want to mention Tom in closing. This book owes its soul to Tom. He kept me and us together over the 20 years it took to bring this book out, to write it, to edit it. I may add, it's really convenient to be married to a talented editor. He is at its heart and on every page. What more can I say, my love? Thank you.
You're gonna read now,
Yeah.
right?
So I'm going to read a poem from every section, beginning with the section of poems about New York City before the towers came down. I'm going to read the last poem in that section, partly because we're in baseball season, and some of you who know my work know that I love to write about baseball. This poem is an homage to Ed Ruscha, who's a California painter and photographer and collagist, whose work I adore. And it's dated September 6th, 2001, which is 5 days before 9/11. The night was mild, clear. Beyond right field, Manhattan nestled on the horizon like coals. Though the Staten Island Yankees lost badly to the Jamestown Jammers, we didn't mind. There was still the ferry ride home. Beyond, the scissor gate pulled across the prow. The skyscrapers beckoned like a ribbon of stars that grew as we approached, dark bands of sky and water, shrinking as the tiny buildings grew ever taller until they loomed above us, suddenly solid, but shot through with white light. The ethereal become all too real, scaffolding on another world. By the time the ferry eased into its berth, we longed to put our feet on solid earth. So the next section of the book is the long narrative sequence of what I now call my adventure on 9/11. And I'm just going to read 2 short passages from it to sort of orient you. The first is right near the beginning. They focus on 2 people that I met that day among a raft of people that are the kindness of strangers referred to by Alicia Ostreicher in the blurb on the back. In case you don't know, we lived a block from the World Trade Center. I was home that morning. Because my sister called me, I looked out our living room window and I saw the North Tower on fire. And I immediately, as Nancy mentioned, decided to flee. So I'm going to start with the second little prose poem in this piece. So I've left the building. It's 9:03 a.m. Don't worry, Angel says. Everything will be okay. It's a doorman's job to reassure, but I knew he is wrong. How could two such tall buildings on fire within not come down? For now, standing outside the building lobby in the courtyard, I can see both towers, can see thick black smoke, orange and red flames, can hear explosions, the steel groaning as it softens and sways, the crackle glass makes shattering. A man hurls an office chair repeatedly against a window on a high floor. At another, glass already gone, two women perch side by side on the narrow sill, hold hands, pause a moment, jump. Moving along, I ended up at the southern end of Manhattan and took the ferry to Staten Island, the last ferry that ran on its regular schedule that morning. It was mostly filled with office workers returning home to Staten Island. I went there probably because, first of all, I didn't want to go closer to the site, but I had been to Staten Island 5 days before, so it seemed like a sort of good place to escape to. I'm going to read the next section because for Abby, who loves it, but evidently a few other people love it too. Nancy is one of them, I know. Two strangers in their 20s bring me to the 120th Precinct Police Station opposite the Staten Island Yankees Stadium. When the uniform cop hears, "She lived there," he opens his arms and gathers me to his chest. Held against his massive bulk, the embossed brass buttons on his jacket, the decorations pinned to his chest, pressing into my cheek. I cry my heart out. Only when I'm ready does this burly, red-necked stranger release me, murmuring, "Stay close to me, you'll be safe here." I stand beside him, reluctant to move, our arms touching. A wool blanket miraculously appears around my shoulders. For years, he volunteers. We've known something like this would happen, but didn't do anything to prevent it. The middle section of the book is about the town where I grew up, a suburban town about 15 miles from New York City in New Jersey called Glen Rock. Glen Rock had 7,000 residents and lost 11 people that morning, losses that resonated through the small community. I'm going to read one poem from there, and it's an homage to Whitman. The Rock in the Glen. Picture a pretty town, peaceful, stately trees lining the streets, children walking to school weekday mornings. Picture cars bikes and pedestrians converging on the two train stations at the same time, the hurried goodbyes. Picture a quietness after the commuters leave, the pretty town like Sleeping Beauty, waiting to be kissed awake when they return. Picture the spill of play, parties, and gossip across yards without hedges or fences. Picture a breeze rustling the oaks and maples, spreading the news the morning of September 11th. Picture a pretty town brought to its knees. The next poem I'm going to read is the first poem in the next section, which begins the aftermath section. It's called The Kiss. 1. Your story. I didn't know anything was happening until I walked into the meeting. The TV was on. Both towers were on fire. Not a minute later, the South Tower collapsed. Knowing you were home, waiting for the rug guys, that moment, I was certain you were dead. How could anyone a block away survive? I turned to Andy and said, "My wife is dead." Then I started to worry it was worse. You were hurt, trapped, in pain, and I wouldn't be able to help. I hoped then you were dead. That would be better. I don't know what I did after that. I tried your cell, couldn't get through. Andy took me back to his house. We sat together watching the TV, waiting for news, not knowing what had happened to you. I was glad I had gone back to kiss you a second time before leaving. Do you remember that? 2. My story. Dimly, I remember your cheeks, plump and soft, and your warm breath blowing close to my face, buried in that cloud of pillows. Your full lips just touching mine. Did I hear your whispered, "I love you"? I don't know. I drifted back to sleep. Only late that night, September 11th, when you ask, do your words come back, as in a dream? And I'm going to read the poem that takes place on September 12th. Probably the only chance I'll have to say that. It's called How to Make an American Flag. Believe it or not, the boys went to school the next day. After dinner, we learned that 2 of their friends' fathers had not come home. To fill the silence, Tom's friend Andy asks his youngest son, "So, what did you do in school today?" In answer, Taylor points to the pin on his mother's blouse. Tiny glass beads strung on 13 small safety pins dangle from a larger one, red and white stripes with a navy blue square in one corner pierced by transparent stars. How I envied Leslie that pin. To this day, I marvel how the clumsy figures of an 8-year-old boy could thread those minuscule beads in the right order. I still can't believe the kids went to school September 12th. So I forgot to time myself, but I'm going to read just a couple more poems. The next one is about living close to the World Trade Center. It's called Pinstripe Bullies, and I'm going to hold up the page because it's a concrete poem, which means that the form of the poem conveys some of the subject matter. So just going to show you so you can see these two slender, skinny columns. I am going to read across the gap between them, but try to pause a little bit so you'll understand where. Pinstriped bullies. Some of us hated you. So tall, too skinny to be true. You swayed in wind-paired pendulums, making us seasick. Alternating vertical stripes, white, black, hurt your eyes marble. Dark glass echoed whatever weather was moving through. We gazed up, necks aching. You ended at sky until you collapsed in a cloud that rivered the blue before falling into the ocean. To live in your shadow was to feel infinitesimal. And I'm going to end with a poem that I probably will never read again, except today because of who's here on the Zoom and in person. It's written in the form of a traditional Arabic poetry, spoken word form, in which a poet would be in a cafe and he would start reciting a poem. I say he because as far as I know, it was generally he's. And the last phrase of each stanza is repeated. And the audience, once it figures out what the last phrase is invited to say the last phrase when the poet is reading it. It's called a ghazal, G-H-A-Z-A-L. And I chose that form for this poem, for this book. Unlike the traditional ghazal, this has a repeated phrase at the beginning of each couplet, and then it's the phrase at the end of the couplet, which you might want to repeat. This is for you. This is for my one, my only sister, Deborah Drake, whose call that morning probably saved my life, years later and counting. This is for Joyce Baldessari, who gave me and 50 strangers safe haven in her home that afternoon, years later and counting. This is for Andy Monsheen, Leslie Holleran, and their 2 sons, in whose home we reunited that night, years later and counting. This is for my mother, who said, "You know, my home is your home," the morning of September 12th, years since she died and counting. This is for all the acquaintances we barely knew, who offered us a place to stay those first few days, years later and counting. This is for Sophie and Lee Dichter, who took care of us and came with us back to our home that first time, years later and counting. This is for Molly Peacock and Mike Roden, in whose home we lived the 5 months we didn't have one, years later and counting. This is for Kim Roberts, Ellen Feinberg, and Karen Wright, who listened when we didn't want to talk, years later and counting. This is for Roy, Stuart, Pilar, Maria Elena, and Steve, who helped more than they could possibly know, years later and counting. This is for my first reader on this project, Joan Michelson in London, to whom I first told this story that first fall, years later and counting. This is for the 11 people I never knew from the town where I grew up. Paul Aquaviva, Christopher Sean Catton, Grace Allegra Kua, Anthony Dionisio, Brendan Dolan, Timothy J. Finnerty, Joseph F. Holland, Damian Meehan, David Robert Meyer, Richard J. Morgan, Daniel M. Van Laere, who perished that terrible morning, years later and counting. Thank you. This is for you. This is for you.
I'm gonna go get the information.
So why don't we all join together in a toast to the book, to the poet, to the poet's husband. I'm so grateful to all the people who helped Andrea, and may many libations be enjoyed this evening.
You're here. Thank you all for joining us. Andrea, do you have anything more you want to tell your Zoom audience before they are gone from the screen? Well, anyway, we do thank you for coming this evening. And we hope that this will give you all that you need to be persuaded to have a copy of this book so that you can see the words yourself. Andrea?
One of the good things about the pandemic is being able to see people at an event like this who wouldn't be able to come even if the event were on the East Coast, because there are people here from foreign countries, and there are people here from Atlanta, and there are people here from all over the place. And but you're all dear to me, and I am so grateful to see your faces and to have you be part of this even remotely. Thank you all. I raise my glass to you.
And thank you, Henry, for doing the technical portion of this
Yes.
evening.
Here, here. Thank you, Henry.
And thank you, Tom, for your help wherever you are, Tom, in the crowd. But I think you had a pretty successful mixed media event. We were a little worried about that, but I think it went off very well. Tom, you did a good job.
Thank you.
Here, here.
Thank you.
And we're
All
going to
right,
sign
we have our
off.
little toast. Where's Nancy? I don't see her.
Nancy's, there she is over in the upper right corner. Okay.
Well, I did one toast. There you go. Can't toast better than that, you two.
All right.
Cheers.
Cheers to all of you.
Cheers.
To you.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. They're here.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night.